Hey everyone, it's JG, doing the math so you don't have to. I've been working on this one for a while, and I'm excited to share it with you. Today's question is, who is the best healer in Arknights? As always, in a game as complex as Arknights, there's not a single right answer. Units can bring a variety of perks and situational bonuses, as well as differences in range and DP cost. But sometimes you just want to know who brings the biggest numbers, right? I've got you covered. The core metric we're analyzing today is HP per second. So the first disclaimer is that I'm only looking at healing. I didn't account for any defensive perks like increased defense or res, or sanctuary buffs. I did count barrier effects because they're measurable in HP. The result is that some great medics look lackluster here. Nightingale is a great example. She's fantastic, but HP per second is not why she's good. She brings a massive res bonus and her cages can bait and tank dangerous attacks, but healing wise, she's pretty lame. You'd think that measuring HP per second is easy. For some medics, it's just a simple computation of attack versus attack speed. But many medics have situational bonuses that range from the straightforward, like the core medic Y module's 15% bonus when healing ground units, to the niche, like Susuro's bonus to operators that cost 10 DP or less. And then there's Tuye. Damn it, Tuye. Why are you like this? I've scored all these operators under ideal conditions, but I will call out the places where the situational bonuses are hard to trigger. And finally, HP per second can be measured in multiple ways. Most healers have a healing curve like this. They heal at a certain level in between skills and then burst to a higher level when their skill is active. We can measure their peak healing or their baseline healing, or their average healing over time, all of which might be useful measures. And even then, are we measuring single target or multi-target healing? AoE Medics can produce a lot more total healing per second, but that only matters if multiple operators are taking damage. When you have a single frontlined ground unit taking all the hits, what matters is how much you can pump into that one target. So in the end, I measured everyone across 6 categories: baseline, peak, and average healing, in both single target and multi-target scenarios. That's way too much info to try and display at once though, so I'll walk you through the highlights in a sensible way. I've broken this into 3 sections and marked them in YouTube so you can jump around or review them later as needed. First, I'll cover the overall best operators across the key categories. For section 2, I'll call out the best choices in every subclass, including the notable 4 or 5-star ops. And finally, section 3 will cover good operators with multiple viable skills and when to choose each one. And by the way, we're going to cover all healer subclasses, not just medics. I've included Abjurer and Bard supporters and Guardian defenders, who all bring a measure of healing. Of course, what would this analysis be without a goofy unit of measure? I measured Vanguards and Myrtles. For healers, our barometer is going to be Lumen. Lumen is a solid charity unit that anyone can get, and his S3 is a very solid skill with mostly infinite uptime. He puts out 445 HP per second when it's up, which will count as 1 lumen. Note that with his skill off, even lumen is only worth half a lumen. So first, who's the best? Although I measured 6 categories, there are 3 operators who kept showing up at or near the top of all of these: Haruka, Monster, and Shu. If you hadn't heard that these are all exceptional units, you haven't been paying attention. Silence is one of the best 5-star medics I'd recommend, but look at how these ops absolutely dwarf her output. Even more impressive is that on top of bringing top tier HP per second, all 3 also bring some powerful secondary benefits outside of just healing. Haruka provides Sanctuary for additional defense. Monster provides attack speed buffs and can dish out true damage. And Shu is a good healer that also has block 3. These units are all crazy good, and you'll see just how good in just a moment. One more GOAT deserves some discussion, and that's TD. Her healing can be utterly absurdly high under the right circumstances, but with like 5 asterisks attached. Incantation Medics are really hard to compare against the other healer types fairly because of the weird way they work. I'll talk about TD in the Incantation Medics section, but her numbers are so broken and so conditional that I had to leave her out of the main analysis. For our first category, let's discuss burst healing. This is what you want when you need to tank a bunch of damage in a short window, like Manbear Pig's Rage Mode or Tallulah's Fireballs. At the very top is Civilite Eterna. She brings a truly massive regen rate to a bunch of operators nearby, which I measure at 7.6 lumens for 30 seconds. Monster's S3 is next at 6.9 lumens, but with the caveat that she needs continuous targets to attack to hit her max potential. Haruka's S3 hits 6.8 lumens of healing, plus it brings 60% Sanctuary and levitates enemies, both of which can massively reduce incoming damage. It's difficult to overstate how massive these three are as wide area healing skills. I defined S rank as being better than 90% of operators, and that places the cutoff for this category at 3.6 lumens, less than half of what Civilite brings. 2 whole lumens below Haruka, we have 3 other solid options that are still S rank, including 2 5-stars, Sora's S1, Papyrus's S2, and Monster's S2, which doesn't have the reliability problems of her S3. If you restrict to single target healing, Haruka's S3 is on top at 3.4 lumens. Shu comes next at 3.2 lumens. Shu's skill is mostly a single target healing skill, but it's actually so powerful that she still clocks in at the low end of S rank in the multi-target category. What a beast! Honorable mention to 5 skills that do great if you have an infinite number of enemies to attack. Monster, Blemishine, and 3 Incantation Medics on their top skills. They produce 2.7 lumens or more under great conditions. The second category is baseline healing. This is their performance with no skill active. Guardians or Abjurers provide 0 or near 0 healing without their skills, so this category is mostly for medics. This category tells you the level of output you can get from your healer consistently, from the very moment you put them on the map. Perfumer is actually the best overall here, if you assume her map-wide regen aura hits 8 operators. Monster is next, and they both clear 1.5 lumens of continuous output. Papyrus, Paprika, and Nightingale are tightly clustered at around 1.4 lumens, but Paprika only hits this level if her targets are below 40% HP to trigger her talent. Note that Nightingale and Perfumer are far above the other multi-target medics because of the Y module that increases their target count from 3 to 4. On the single target side of things, Eyja Alter is exceptional at 0.9 lumens. Shining and Silence are the other S rank options. The third category is average healing, but this category is a little bit weird. If we just compute average healing over time, the top 3 are Monster, Haruka, and Civilite Eterna. Haruka and Civilite provide very little healing in between skills, but burst so insanely high during their skill that they win in the average category too. That's useful information, but it won't really help if you die in that healing desert in between their skills. So what I decided to measure is long-term consistency. I filtered to infinite skills or fast-charging auto skills that provide a relatively stable output over time. Haruka's S2 is the best here by far, but also the most finicky skill on this list. Before she hits the infinite level of output, you'll have 2 periods of downtime and 1 burst at a lower level of healing. Eyja Alter's S1 is an excellent option that reaches 2.4 lumens after 1 minute, but is a respectable 0.9 lumens before that. A bunch of multi-target or chain medics do pretty well here, and I'll say more about those in section 2. An honorable mention here to Saria's S2, which provides AoE healing at the same level as Perfumer's no-skill output. For a healer that also has block 3 and melee attacks, that's very solid. On the single target side of things, Eyja and Haruka are still the top 2 but in the opposite order. Lumen comes in at, shockingly, 1 lumen, and Quercus is close to that but with 0 healing until her infinite skill activates. If you want consistent output from Shu, her S1 is next best at 0.9 lumens and no charge up time like the rest of these. There's an interesting pattern here that you may have spotted. The best healing also comes with the biggest risks. The very best burst healing doesn't come from medics. It comes from Civilite Eterna, Haruka, Shu, Blemishine, and Sora, all of whom will have substantial downtime in between their giant skills. And the best medic skills like Monster's S3, Papyrus's S2, and TD's S3 are only the best when you can meet their requirements around target availability. Typical medics with typical skills are good for consistency and can give a decent burst in a pinch, but when you're facing a brutal fight, you might want to consider the insane bursts you can reach by bringing one of these unreliable units for a crucial moment. Those are the headlines. Now let's move on to section 2, the best operators in each subclass. This is a good point to remind you to please like this video and subscribe to my channel to help support me doing data dives like this. I put a ton of time into this one and I hope it's worth your time. Before we dive into the specific subclasses, here's a key observation from the data. Which medic you bring is a lot less interesting than which kind of medic you bring. Here's a quick comparison of all the core medic skills in red and the wandering medic skills in blue. If you exclude Eyja and the 3 stars, you see basically every wandering medic is worse than every core medic. Most subclasses cluster pretty tightly together like this. Which subclass you pick is way more determinative of your results than which medic you pick. Here is a chart of the median single target healing by subclass. This is one of the top things you should take away. Core and chain medics provide the best healing. Guardians, AoE Medics, and Wandering Medics all sit substantially lower. Guardians actually tends to outperform the other two, while also bringing block 3 and melee damage. Therapists sit in between. Without a Y module or targets that are very close, they're closer to the classes on the right, but at their best, they're still a step down from core medics. There are just a handful of specific skills that break the mold here, which we'll cover in a few moments. But for the vast majority of healers, this chart tells you what you really need to know. We also have to talk about chain medics. Check out these charts of single and multi-target healing. Nobody should be surprised that core and AoE medics win their respective category and are worse in the other category, but check out where chain medics land. They're at 90% of the best subclass in both categories. Chain medics are an incredible middle ground between these two that do both roles well, and that's because of the way chain heals work. They provide more healing to the primary target and progressively less HP to each subsequent target. That lets the most injured target get healing close to a core medic, while still providing sizable team-wide healing in a splash damage scenario. So, who's best in each subclass? Let's start with the best multi-target subclasses and work our way down towards the lowest healing archetypes. AoE medics are really tightly clustered. Breeze is bad, Nightingale and Perfumer are good, and everybody else is fine. Perfumer is a 4-star that deserves a little more attention. Her talent provides a low level of regen to all friendly units on the map. That gives her the top total healing without skills of anybody, which is a nice start. Her regen aura can heal summons, including things like Gnosti's platform or Praminix's frozen objective point, and can also heal normally unhealable operators like Juggernauts or Reapers. The regen rate isn't huge, but has a variety of uses, and she is an excellent cheap draft in integrated strategies. She's worth developing for almost anybody. The chain medics are all good. Monster is unsurprisingly the best. We have to talk about Papyrus, though. She's a 5-star charity operator from Adventure That Cannot Wait for the Sun, so you can get her to max potential for free, and she is straight up one of the best all-around healers in the whole game. I mentioned earlier that chain medics are a great combination of single-target and multi-target healing, and Papyrus really proves the rule. She's S rank for total healing, with either one of her skills or with no skill at all. I built my Papyrus as soon as I ran these numbers. If you don't have Monster, build Papyrus. Paprika has similar numbers to Papyrus, but has a more conditional kit, so there's really no reason not to prefer the free operator. Incantation Medics are weird and don't really function like medics. They function like casters who also provide some healing. Their healing scales with the damage they do, so when enemy res is high, or when enemies aren't around, their healing output goes down, which I find to be a critical tactical weakness. TD, whose peak output is insanely high, also requires that enemies are susceptible to sleep. If TD puts 4 enemies to sleep with her S2 or S3, they both burst to a preposterous 16 lumens of healing, modified by enemy res. Even against enemies with S-rank res, that's an S-rank healing skill, as long as the enemies stay asleep and don't die. With just one sleeping enemy, the numbers are reasonable enough that you can compare her against the others in the subclass. TT and Reed are much better than the others. Despite TT's numbers here, I think this whole subclass is pretty skippable, and you can refer to my review of TT if you want to hear an explanation of why. For core medics, the best option is Silence, who eclipses even the 6-star Shining. Her drone is one of the few core medic skills that can hit multiple targets, and also provides a measure of global healing range. If you're missing the meta healers, she's an incredibly viable option. Below that, Shining and Tuye are solid. Kaltzit's S2 is technically very close to them, but Kaltzit doesn't really function like a healer. There are also 3 skills that are noteworthy. Record Keeper has an interesting and situational S2. While the skill is active, his heals grant a buff that causes operators to recover 150 HP every time they take damage. I don't really have any realistic baseline for a normal number of attacks to take per second, and it's incredibly variable, so it's hard to score him fairly against other medics. But in context with a lot of small hits, especially things like damage over time or poison haze, Record Keeper can out-heal everyone else on this list. And 2 4-stars have skills that can be great. Gaviel's S1 imparts a regen effect that is pretty sizable and makes her a decent single-target medic. But that regen doubles in potency when targets are below 50% health. Against heavily injured targets, she pulls into the low end of S rank for uptime-weighted healing, ahead of Silence. Finally, Susuro. Fully mastered, her S2 boosts both attack and attack speed by 100%, resulting in a 4x jump in healing output. That's a phenomenal S-rank single target skill, literally the best skill in the subclass. The trick is, it can only be activated twice per battle. That limitation is substantial but not debilitating. She's another justifiable early draft for integrated strategies where most battles are short. Therapists are mostly focused on managing negative statuses and have significantly lower healing than core medics. Lumen is free, and he's the best at both healing and removing negative statuses, so there's very little reason to pay attention to anybody else in this subclass. Wandering medics can heal elemental injury, but they're bad at healing HP because of it. Eyja is good, even better than all the core medics. If you don't have her, Herald is the least bad of the others. Guardians have a pretty wide spread. Shu, of course, is the best. Blemish Line can be very good if you give her enough targets to hit. Of the others, only 3 are worth your attention. Saria's S2 can produce more than 1.5 lumens of AoE healing, more than any medic produces without their skill on. Both Saria and Neural produce 0.7 lumens of single target healing with their S1s, which is more than any core medic produces without their skills. While the medics can burst a little higher, you can think of these two as basically being a ground-based medic without bursts. The 4-star Gummy's S1 is a full step lower than that, but she's on par with or better than the other 5-star Guardians. She's also a reliable integrated strategies pull if you need a bit of healing without a medic voucher. On to section 3. A lot of the best healers have multiple viable skills. While Haruka, Monster, and Shu took a lot of gold and silver medals in section 1, it wasn't always the same skill winning in different categories. Here's a quick guide to the best skills for some of the top operators. Let's start with Monster. All 3 of her skills are viable and are handily S-rank. S1 has the lowest total output, but it's an auto skill, so it's really consistent and AFK friendly. S2 is a classic burst healing skill. Use it if you want Monster to behave like a typical medic. S3 has the highest potential, but is the most variable. She attacks enemies within her modified range, but only triggers heals when there's something to attack. For a boss that won't die partway through the skill, it's an amazing combination of damage and healing. In everyday use, there's a real risk of killing everything in range and then healing nobody. Haruka's S2 and S3 are both exceptional. S2 takes 60 seconds to fully activate and is then by far the highest consistent healing output in the game. S3 has a wider range and bursts to 2x the healing, plus 2x the sanctuary, and it levitates enemies who attack your operators. But it has 60 seconds of downtime after its 40-second activation, which most likely means you need a secondary healer to manage her downtime, whereas S2 can quite viably be the only healing skill you bring. Shu's S1 is reliable and automatic, but unless AFK is extremely important to you, it's a waste of Shu. It's the only one of her skills that doesn't break S rank in at least one dimension. Of S2 and S3, S2 produces higher multi-target healing when you wait by uptime, but only by about 13%. S3 has a larger range and a ton of support benefits, so while it's not better in absolutely every dimension, it's probably the best choice and the only one worth mastering. Eyja's S2 is pretty lousy for HP, but that's because it's focused on elemental recovery. S1 is a fantastic infinite skill that includes the ability to hit multiple targets. It's the best source of consistent single target healing and the second best consistent multi-target healing after Haruka. S3 has some powerful perks like global healing range and boosting everybody's max HP. Consequently, its healing output is a lot more disappointing, mostly B rank. Papyrus should usually default to her S1, which is a set it and forget it auto skill. Her S2 bursts 2x as high, but it is a little tricky to use. She locks on to the ally with the highest max HP, but can only perform a heal if that operator is injured. If you're careful about your formation and enemies, it bursts even higher than Monster's S2. That's it for today. I hope you learned something. I definitely found a few surprises from running these numbers. Please like and subscribe if you like this sort of content.